Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo.
Amateur Traveler, episode 383. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about slot canyons, towering mesas, and ancestral Pueblo people ruins as we go to the Navajo Nation.
One more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. This episode of the Amateur Traveler is again sponsored by Viator. I found 16 different tours that go to the Navajo Nation from various parts of Arizona, Flagstaff, Sedona, and Phoenix. They range from day tours from 7-day trips and start as little as $100. If you go to amateurtraveler.com/tours, then Amateur Traveler gets credit. Before we get into this week's episode, I do have 3 news stories for you. And the first one is bizarre. I kind of wish that this had come from theonion.com. There's apparently a credible threat that Al-Qaeda is planning attacks on airlines flying out of London using breast implant suicide bombs. This is obviously not good, and I'm going to assume that this is not a story that was made up by the TSA just so they could do better pat-downs. In good news for travelers, Priceline.com has done a survey that says the staycation is dead. Well, what they really said is that 83% of Americans say they plan to vacation away from home this year. 87% say they return relaxed after a family vacation. Clearly, they're not traveling with me. In another good news story, China is loosening up its visa requirements. If you're flying through the city of Guangzhou, you can now stay 72 hours visa-free and to see the city, and that is also true apparently, and I had missed this story, of Beijing and Shanghai. So if you happen to be transiting through China, you can stop for 3 days and see the sights. For links to all 3 of those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Mark Carrara, who's come to us from markstravels.com and come to talk to us about the Navajo Nation. Mark, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you.
Now, we have people at this point scrambling for their globes, trying to find some particular country, and this is a tricky one because we are sort of talking about the U.S., and yet we're not. Would you want to put us on a map here?
It is basically most of the Navajo Nation, which used to be considered Navajo Reservation, is in Arizona. It does spill over into New Mexico and into Utah. They are a separate sovereign nation, but still part of the U.S. It's very interesting legal implications. When you drive there, you will see people with Navajo Nation license plates, and you'll see people with Arizona license plates. It's a very interesting situation.
And we'll be talking about some national parks that are national parks, but not U.S. national parks, but of the Navajo Nation.
And there are some that are jointly run. They may be considered national parks, but they're operated by the tribe. So it is a very interesting area in that respect.
And this episode will overlap with a couple different episodes we've done before. So if you hear something you're interested in and you want to look more, also look at the Four Corners episode. And then we did some episodes way back that are the Southwest Road Trip. We'll talk about a couple destinations that'll overlap with that. But it's about time we redid some of those. So what kind of recommendation would you make for an itinerary to see this part of the U.S.?
Well, first off, you're going to have to drive. Well,
right.
There are some specialty tours, mainly archaeological tours that will take you to some of the sites run by some companies. But all in all, you're going to drive. You're going to probably land at one of the Phoenix, Albuquerque, maybe Las Vegas, and you're going to either rent a car or you're going to drive to the area. Basically, there is no public transportation through the area.
And even when we talk about driving, I remember when I drove into Antelope Canyon, which is one of the places we'll talk about, from Las Vegas, I think for the day and a half that I was driving, because I stopped in the North Rim of the Grand Canyon, you're getting almost no radio reception. You're out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, you are. It's a lot better than it was. I first went through this area shortly after college in the early 80s, and it was very desolate. You might not see a gas station for hundreds of miles. It's gotten a lot better since then. I mean, there are modern gas stations, modern conveniences, at least in what they would consider the larger towns.
When you say desolate, and that's an interesting, because we're talking about an area that is fairly open. And yet for me, as somebody who grew up in the West, I find this area, while it is quite desolate and barren, I find it also quite beautiful.
I do too. I enjoy the emptiness, the dryness. I grew up in Illinois where we don't have a lot of trees. I grew up in the plains, the prairies. And to me, trees sort of close me in. I need to see the sky. And I really enjoy going out there and looking up and seeing the clouds, the sky, the stars at night. I enjoy being able to look and see 50, 60 miles in the distance. It's interesting, but it does scare people who are grown up in a city and they look and they might drive on a road and see one other person in an hour or two.
Now, we talk about what time to go later, but this is an area where we're talking about, for instance, we said maybe you'd start in Las Vegas. I know the temperature in Las Vegas today, and this is July, late July, was 118 degrees. So what time of year are we thinking we want to go here?
That's an interesting question. I knew you'd be asking that, and I thought about it. Most people will tell you go in the spring and fall. I'll tell you, I like summer because of the longer days. It gives you more hours to see things.
You are a braver man than I am.
Well, I live in New Mexico where 100 degrees is a typical day anyway. So maybe that's the case. And with modern air conditioning, your car, unless you break down, should be pretty good. Most people will tell you, though, that spring and fall are the best time to go.
Yeah, I think I was in this area in September and October, and I think that was a lovely time to go.
Yeah.
The one thing that'd be different between spring and fall is for areas that have runoff from snow, you're going to see a lot more water in the springtime.
And winter can be extreme. It can get some blizzards out there when nothing has stopped the wind. Even an inch or two will pile up pretty deep. I would not recommend the winter for just about anybody going out there. I think the weather could be quite extreme.
Okay, so we've flown in. We've got either our rental car or we've driven in. Where do we go to next?
I personally, and maybe it's because I do live in New Mexico, think Gallup, New Mexico is the place you should start. They claim to be the gateway to the Navajo Nation. There's probably 3 or 4 towns you can consider gateways. Flagstaff coming in from the south, and if you came into Phoenix, that'd be a good place. Durango or Farmington up in the northeast part, which is in the Four Corners area. Page, Arizona from the north. That would be probably, if you've landed in Vegas, where you would probably drive to and base yourself out of. I like Gallup because one of my things I like to do is shopping for Native American art. And Gallup claims to have about 80 to 85% of all Native American arts and crafts pass through the city in the wholesale or retail trade. So if you want real Native art.
And we're not talking about made in China. You're talking about the real.
No.
Okay.
And that's one of the interesting things was I was reading some of the reviews of some of the stores on, I think it was TripAdvisor, and the one lady commented that she thought it was a trading post has souvenirs and cheap plastic, and she was shocked to see things for thousands of dollars there. These are true art pieces. Mm-hmm. I mean, you will go in and you will see rugs that are in 5 figures, $10,000, $12,000. You'll see jewelry in the same price range. You'll see pieces that I don't know how anybody could wear because they look like they weigh 3 pounds of turquoise. And you will find what it is, and I guess traditionally they were called pawn shops also. And they're not like the back alley pawn shops you think of in the bigger cities. Natives would bring jewelry and they would trade for goods they needed. Food.
So it really was a trading post. That's not just a name. Okay.
And still to this day, you can see them bringing in their stuff, and there's a special desk where they will get cash for their artwork. And you can see there is some what's called dead pawn, which is something that was pawned by somebody. It's been there for I don't know how many days after the loan was up. And I bought a belt buckle this time that was probably from the 40s, and it was somebody had pawned it, and I was able to get it, and I like it because it's simpler than some of the newer stuff that's out there. So Gallup is a great place to spend a day or two. One of the things they have in August is a arts and crafts fair, which I believe they advertise as the oldest native arts and crafts fair in the country. It has all the tourist things you need. It's got the hotels, all the chains, and then the independents. And one thing I should mention is nowhere in this area are you going to find the 5-star resorts. So don't expect that. I mean, you'll find decent upper-end chain places, but you're not going to find the places that are going to cost you $500, $600 a night.
I think I could live with that. Okay.
Yeah. My wife and I always go for middle-of-the-road chain hotels, and we're quite happy with that.
Okay. So we're doing some shopping and some art gazing in Gallup. Is there anything else we want to do before we leave town?
Not really there. I happen to have been there 4th of July, and that was kind of interesting. But normally I go to Gallup as just a place to do shopping. And it's right along the interstate, and it's a good place to start your trip.
And I'm assuming the 4th of July is a small-town 4th of July kind of celebration?
Yeah, with the fireworks. Of course, this year, as dry as it was, they had to delay it because one of the aerials started a small brush fire, so they had to rush the fire trucks out there to put it out before they could go on. Yeah, small town, fireworks, parades, things like that.
Okay.
After Gallup, you have a choice of which way you want to go. This time, we went sort of northwest on an angle, and then we came back, sort of like a circle trip, coming back through the Four Corners area. But there are 3, I would call major towns, or not cities, in the Navajo Nation, which you can sort of do things at. Shiprock, which is their capital. It's sort of in the northeast part of their reservation. Tuba City, which is in the center. Now, Tuba City was not named for the musical instrument. It was named for some chief sometime in the past.
Okay.
And then Window Rock, which is very close to Gallup, is in the southwest part of there. So depending where you want to head, we headed towards Tuba City on our last trip there. There is some stuff between Gallup and Tuba City. There is the Hubble Trading Post, which is an historical trading post run by the Park Service. There are interesting scenery to drive, but you will be driving for 4 or 5 hours through what some people, me included, consider pretty interesting terrain, but a lot of people will consider boring, I think. It's something you'll have to get used to. And there are several museums in the area, too. And one thing that is there is the Hopi Nation, which is a separate tribe, has their reservation surrounded by the Navajo. And that has caused a lot of friction in the past. The latest I've heard is that's pretty much settled down, but in the 80s there was some real big friction going on. So the Hopi's a whole nother tribe with their own culture, their own museums. I did not visit at this time just because I didn't have time. And I really have never been there. I've been to some of the pueblos in New Mexico, but I've never been to the Hopi mesas. It's just another thing that one of these days I'll have to get to.
Well, as I recall, the Hopi are a Pueblo people.
Yes.
And the Navajo are not.
That is correct. The Navajo are farmers, and they live in scattered, I would say, family-type settlements, where the Hopi are Pueblo, and they live in communities. They still have some of the historic Pueblos. The Navajo were nomadic. One of the interesting things is trying to figure out or understand when the Navajo first came to that part of the United States. I have heard numbers everywhere from 1000 AD to 1500 AD. So they are a relatively recent part of the community there. The Hopi trace their lineage back to the Anasazi or ancestral Pueblos, which grew out of the Paleo-Indian tradition in the area. So they have been there for thousands of years, if not tens of thousands of years. So there is a little difference there. And they have been at odds, like I said. One of the museums that you will visit that I thought was pretty interesting was the Code Talkers. And we can mention that. Some people have heard about this. And because it's getting on in years, the Code Talkers were a group of Navajos in the Second World War, which worked with the military to transmit communications. They used Navajo language, and they also put it in code, which made it very difficult, if not impossible, for the Japanese military to crack the code. There's fewer and fewer left, but they have, in the last several years, really been honored by the tribe with at least one, if not two, different museums about them.
And where are the museums?
In Window Rock, which is the capital. Not exactly 100% sure, but I know there's one in Window Rock, and the other one, I don't remember where it was. It may be just a memorial as opposed to a actual museum.
Well, the interesting thing there, too, is that it was so successful that it remained a secret after World War II for a number of years, decades, I want to say even, so that when they came back, they really couldn't talk about what they had been doing.
Yeah, and like I said, it's only been recently that they've really gotten the publicity they're due, as there are fewer and fewer of them left. And so many of the Code Talkers never got the recognition they should have gotten because, like you said, it was a secret operation.
Right. Yeah, if it had been a failure, we might have known more about it sooner.
Yeah.
So,
those are the museums that, like I said, the Code Talker Museum, the Navajo Museum, which is in Window Rock, I believe it is also. And they explain their perspective on things. And it is interesting that they have a completely different perspective of history as the Anglos do, the Americans, and even the Hispanics. You know, this part of the country, there has been those three great powers or groups that have been at conflict and in peace, more or less, for hundreds of years. So it's very interesting to see the different interpretations of history from the different groups.
Where to next?
It depends now if you're into scenery or history at this point. I'm into both, so I usually go to both places. I like the Antelope Canyon, which we mentioned, which is in the northern part of the Navajo Nation. It is one of the slot canyons. Almost everybody has probably seen pictures of Antelope Canyon.
Even if they didn't realize it, right?
Right, yeah, because it's these very narrow, wind-carved canyons with the amazing colors.
I think this is actually water-carved, as I recall, but...
Okay. Yeah,
it's a little too narrow. When we say narrow, just to put it in perspective, there's two parts, and the lower Antelope Canyon is a crack in the ground. As you go in, it's about the width of my shoulders.
Yeah, and the lower canyon is much more difficult to get to. Upper canyon's a walk-in. It's still narrow. There were places where two people had trouble passing side by side.
Well, when you say difficult to get to, it's not wheelchair-friendly, for instance.
No.
You have to be able to do a couple ladders. It's not
ladders, yes.
Yeah.
It's not difficult to get to other than you have to drive out to the middle of the desert. But
right.
I didn't do it because I'm not ladder friendly. But I have been told that that is the better place to go because it less people, you get longer on their tours are longer, and it's better photography because of the less people.
I loved them both. I would have to say I did Lower Antelope Canyon as soon as it opened early in the morning, was the first one in, and it was gorgeous. I went in just basically that one is run by a family, and went in with one of the young sons and was by myself much of the time, or with one or two people around me, as you say. And it is, if you're claustrophobic, this would be a really bad place to go. And also in flash flood season, both of these places are not someone you want to be.
Yes.
In fact, a number of years ago now, probably a decade ago, they lost some people when they didn't realize there was a flash flood coming. So
the story they tell is, and that would have been 93 or 94, there was a foreign group of, I think, 12 people, and they ignored their guide's warnings and said, we're going to go in. It doesn't look like rain around here. And 11 of them died in a flash flood, because flash floods don't need rain in the area.
Right. It needs rain uphill.
Well, yes.
Exactly.
And because of that, they now really limit the people who go in there. You must go with a guide,
right?
And they must be a Navajo guide.
And they've also put in some exit ladders in strategic places so that if you needed to get out, you wouldn't have to go back all the way to the beginning. And then Upper Antelope Canyon, I think, is a little shorter.
Yes.
Lower Antelope, I want to say, is something like a quarter of a mile. And Upper Antelope Canyon, I went there at noon, which is what people were recommending when the light is coming straight down. And actually, beautiful pictures from both places. And you do have to get out on a pickup truck to get out to Upper Antelope Canyon. But really, I did love both.
Yeah, basically the way it works is we were in Page staying, and we walked down the street to one of these tour guides, and they were booked up. And they said, well, you can go out to the site and see if there's any availability at the site, because they have tour guides out there also. Right. And, well, we drove out, and we couldn't get anything for that day, but we were able to get the 10 o'clock tour the next day. Now, what I have found since then is they go every hour. The 10, 11, and 12 o'clock tours are more expensive because they have the better light. The early morning, later afternoon, because the light is so weak, you have trouble doing pictures, those tours are less money.
And I would say this is a place not to skimp on the money.
No, that's another thing. And I also recommend going right to the site, because the tours are limited by the tribal governments to how long they can be, how many minutes. And the tours in town must count their drive time. So you lose 15, 20 minutes both ways.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. So if you drive out to the site, which is 5 miles from town, and now you will probably need cash. Even in our plastic society, I went out there the first day, and their credit card machine was broken because there is no electricity or phones. It's all done by cell phone, and the reception is not the best out there. So they really highly recommend bringing cash, because their credit card machine may not work the time you're out there.
Excellent. If you can't take a good picture at Antelope Canyon, give it up. Sell the camera, put it up on eBay.
Yeah, and the guides will help you. And they will tell you, stand here, point there, set it like this. Our guide actually was taking our pictures. She would grab everybody's camera, and then we would all pose, and she'd take our picture, and then we move on. All the guides are natives. It's required by the tribal council. They are very well versed in what's going on there. And it is really neat. Like you said, you come to the spot, and then you jump in a truck. You drive about 3 miles down a wash to the entrance, and then we go through. It was about 45 minutes of walking one way, and then you turn around and try to squeeze your way back the other way through the crowds coming in. And the 11 o'clock tour was by far the busiest. But what was interesting is, as we were leaving, they had us, what they do is once in a while special photography tours, where they are much smaller sizes, and they actually work with photographers and with tripods. And we were able to take some pictures with that group. One of the quintessential pictures is the light shaft in the canyon. And what they do is they'll have the guide throw up sand and tell everybody, shoot right now, and you get the sand, you can see the light shaft. So we actually got one of those pictures, because it is really cool to see this light shaft coming down into the canyon.
Excellent. Where do we go after Antelope Canyon?
We spent the day in Page, which is just outside the reservation.
And the town there was really built for the nearby dam.
Right, yes. Glen Canyon Dam and Lake Powell.
Yeah.
Lake Powell is I I believe, the second largest man-made lake in the world or in the United States. And it has huge, huge houseboats for rent. I was looking at the brochure. They had one that was a 125-foot-long houseboat, slept 24 people, and rented for like $3,000 a night. It is not with the rest of the area. It's sort of different. It's more of the upper end stuff. That's why I really didn't like it. And the environmentalists still consider that to be the biggest environmental issue of all times, the dam there. I guess I'm more on that side of the situation. So
I personally think I would love exploring all the different nooks and crannies of that great big lake on a boat.
I thought so too, but I'm not going to do it on a 125-foot boat.
No, not on a 125 boat.
I think the 24-foot for myself, my wife, and our grandkids would have been kind of interesting, and we may end up doing that in the future. But it's interesting to see the dam. They do take tours. You can take a tour, but you have to go through security screening because of the terrorism issues. We looked at it. We said, wow, and that was about it. Took a couple of pictures. I
did do the tour, actually. I enjoyed it quite a lot, but then I am an engineer, so I would. So
that was that. Then we also, there is a scenic overlook just south of Page, 3-4 miles south of Page, and you walk, I'd say maybe a quarter mile out onto the edge of the canyon, and you can see a horseshoe bend where the river does almost a 180 turn right there. And that's very popular at sunset. And there was, I'd say, a couple hundred people out there when we walked out there for sunset.
And we're talking about the Colorado River.
Yes, the Colorado River just below the dam. One thing I should mention, this may not be as timely depending when people listen to this. For the next year or so, one of the major highways, Highway 89, is closed because of a landslide. And there are some detours. They are working on shortening the detours, but that won't be this summer season and maybe by fall. But to repair the road, it's going to take a couple of years. So the direct route from Flagstaff north is closed. You might want to check that out if you're thinking of driving.
Oh, good to know. Okay.
So after the Page area, we headed east, and the quintessential southwest view is Monument Valley. I mean, if you show a picture of Monument Valley to just about anybody in the world, they would have recognized it. It is the one place that everybody has seen, and you might not even realize it. It's another tribal park. It was nice to see. I'm glad I went. It's on the way, so it's not like it's out of the way, but it is really kind of interesting. It's not really a place you're going to spend days or hours at, but I think it was really cool to see.
And when we talk about the quintessential vista, we're talking about the mesas, big, especially the couple big mitten-shaped mesas, I think are the...
Yes, left and right mitten or east and west mitten, something. It was first made famous in 1938 by John Ford in his movie Stagecoach, which brought John Wayne onto the scene in Hollywood. And since then, it has been in multiple movies. I just saw a commercial recently, a car commercial, where Monument Valley is featured in a car commercial. And I'm sure everybody has seen it. And it's like I said, it's world renowned. When you think of the Southwest, that's what you think of.
Okay.
That's the scenery. Now if we're going to start talking about history, there is the Navajo Monument, which has a couple of ancestral Pueblo or Anasazi ruins. Anasazi is the term that we used for decades, since probably the 20s until recently, when some of the people who have descended from the Anasazi don't like that word because it has some negative connotations. It means ancient enemy or something like that.
I think ancestors of our enemies is what I found.
Something like that. And so the more correct term now is the ancestral Pueblo, because they did go on to become the current modern Pueblo tribes. They populated this part of the country from about, I would imagine, 600 or 700 AD to right around the time of the Spanish of 1500s. They were an interesting culture. There's a lot of debate about where they came from, where they learned this stuff. And until recently, there was even a debate as to where they went. It's pretty much a given now that they did amalgamate with the Pueblo tribes in the Rio Grande Valley of New Mexico and into the Hopi Nation. So Navajo Monument is a monument, a tribal park that has two ruins there. Most people have heard of Mesa Verde, which is the big national park up in Colorado in this part, and that was ancestral Pueblo people. But this is one of the smaller ones. Another monument in the area is Canyon du Chelly. This is owned by the Park Service, the National Park Service, but run by the Navajo tribe. It's another one of those places that you have limited access without a guide because of cultural issues that this, first off, with the Navajo, separating religion and culture is very difficult. It's one and the same to a Navajo. So it has cultural and religious significance and historical significance. So they want to make sure that you don't desecrate it to them, so that you must go with a guide on most of the tours. Now, you can take a driving tour around the outside of the canyon and look at the ruins from a distance, but to actually get up there, you're going to have to take a tour. And they have them right there at the tribal, as in most of these tribal parks. When you pay your $6 to get in, they will have a stand with different people giving tours at different lengths. You want to take a photography tour, you want to take a hiking tour, you want to take a simple overview tour. You can get what you want there.
And which one did you do?
We didn't go there this time. I have done the drive around. I've been wanting to do one of the backcountry tours, and my wife is not into it as much as me. So it's going to be one of my man-only trips that I take one of these years again.
The backcountry tour, I know there's some tours on horseback. Is that what the backcountry tour is then?
Yeah, there are horseback, and then there are hiking tours. I would probably do the horseback, but there are hiking tours too. And you can also do overnight tours if you with a guide. One of the books I read on photography of the area recommended some of the overnight tours that they can do, because you can get sunrise, sunset pictures that you cannot get during a day tour.
Okay.
To me, the most impressive historical site in this whole area is not Mesa Verde, which is in, like I said, in Colorado, and is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You drive a couple of hours south into New Mexico, and you come to Chaco Canyon National Historic Park. It is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The issue is it's at the end of a 40-mile dirt road, and there are no hotels within 2-hour drive of the place. Maybe 3-hour drive. But it is by far the most impressive set of ruins in the United States. Some of the largest of these great houses the ancestral Pueblos built. Pueblo Bonito is the most famous, and it's just impressive. I have stayed there several times where I've camped, and if you can go for a hike right around sunset through these ruins, and you're the only person there, and it's really kind of eerie to hear the winds whistling through these multiple room pueblos. I think Pueblo Bonito would have had 1,000-some rooms, 3 stories, when it was in its heyday. One thing that they don't really do a good job of at the park, and I've commented them several times, is they show you all this monumental architecture, but you don't see the villages where the normal people lived. So you think when you drive through here, there was like a dozen huge houses. Where did everybody live? There were no small houses. Well, they've never excavated them or never conserved them for people to see. But there were people living in this valley, and it's just amazing.
Now, the whole area we've been talking about here is roughly how big?
I would say when I looked it up, it's about the size of South Carolina. So we're talking a fairly large area. It's the size of Ireland is another way to compare it. So we're talking 25,000 square miles, I believe, but with only 175,000 people living in it. That's the size of a small town in some places. So it is very open. Like I said, Chaco Canyon is at the end of a 40-mile road, and you might not pass another car, and you won't pass another house between getting off the highway and getting into the national park. If you like that kind of environment, it's the place to go. And there are some wilderness areas in that part of the state of New Mexico where they're really unique rock formations and things like that. They're a little bit harder to get to. They're not for the general public to go to unless you got a four-wheel drive. And I should mention, almost every place I've talked about and many more are accessible by the normal family car. Mm-hmm. Like I said, in the 80s when I was there were a lot of these roads that you didn't go without a Jeep, you were in trouble. But now they've really been at least graded, and most are paved. So you don't have to worry about that. There are some roads, though, that will require four-wheel drive vehicles, mainly because of the high clearance, not so much the... And when it rains, the few times a year it rains, the mud out there gets really bad.
Mm-hmm. What's going to surprise people when they come down to the Navajo Nation?
I think the biggest surprise for us was the number of foreign tourists compared to Americans. It was, I would say, and maybe it was just us listening, at least half of the people were talking a foreign language. Germans, French. It was just amazing that they've heard about it and they've come to see it, where it doesn't seem like as many Americans do. Mm-hmm. So that was the biggest surprise my wife and I talked about a couple of times. It's interesting that we hear so many foreign languages. I know a couple of people would come up to me and ask me questions, and they all talked with a very thick accent.
I found that was true with a lot of the national parks in the Southwest as well, yes. Is that they really had amazing reputations, that people had heard about them, and very undervalued by Americans, which is right. A shame, because they are amazing and fantastic.
Mm-hmm. And they're easy to get to. I mean, like I said, it's not that hard anymore. Modern cars, air conditioning, you could do it.
Now, some of the stops in that particular area have been known to be a little kitschy, a little tourist trappy.
Yes. That's why I liked Gallup. If you know what you're looking for, you can get the cheap. Because my wife and I were in a place, and she was looking at placemats. And I said, those aren't native. She said, how do you know? I said, turn it over. I said, like, made in India. So you could get the $15 knockoffs, or you could buy the $10,000 rug. So there are places like that. And when you get onto the actual reservation, you will find very few knockoffs. Mm-hmm. You will find all authentic, quality-made stuff. And it will be at different price points. We were looking at guitar picks, silver guitar picks for my one daughter, and they were $15. I mean, and it's handmade. And like I said, they're $15,000 rugs. So you can find at all price levels. And in the Navajo Nation, you don't have to worry about cheap.
I usually ask this question, but I think I know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway. You're standing in the prettiest spot. Where are you standing, and what are you looking at?
Just about everything, but I would have to have a toss-up of between Antelope Canyon and Monument Valley. Okay. Monument Valley, because of the big, broad landscape, and then the colors and the shapes in Antelope Canyon, I would have a hard time deciding.
Now, we're in the U.S. You're not that far from home. You're half a state away from where you live. Any moments that were the total we're not in Kansas anymore sort of moments?
When you turn on the radio and you hear Navajo radio stations where they don't speak English, except in some of the commercials. I don't know if there are no words for the numbers, but you will hear words that are to us gibberish, and then you'll hear a number, like a phone number. Mm-hmm. That was just interesting. There are a couple of radio stations that broadcast in all Navajo.
Music or talk?
Both.
Okay.
So, and the week we were out there is when the Lone Ranger was opening, which was actually supported by the Navajos. And another big opening was Star Wars had been translated into Navajo for the first time. Oh, excellent. And they were opening that in Window Rock the 4th of July weekend. But yes, the language is alive, and they are working hard to keep it alive.
Interesting. Most memorable person you met, preferably Navajo?
I think our guide at Antelope Canyon, her name was Sherry, and she was, I thought, probably the most memorable person. If I didn't have to limit to Navajo, one of the shopkeepers in Gallup was just a funny guy, because he kept trying to bargain with me for a pot that I didn't really want. And after he kept lowering the price, he finally said, "You're a good guy," so he gave me a soda just because I talked to him for a half hour. But the Navajo guide at Antelope Canyon, Sherry, I thought was probably one of the neatest people.
Besides extra water and sunscreen, anything else we should throw in the trunk before we're driving through this area?
I always, the water is important, the sunscreen. I took guidebooks as books on Kindle.
Okay.
And I also downloaded some apps for the area. They're much more up to date. And you will find wireless service available in all the bigger cities. So that's what I took.
Any commentary on the guidebooks, things that you would change if you were the editor of the next edition?
Not a lot, except I would play down Lake Powell. I just didn't find it as interesting as they played it up. And maybe it's because it's more commercial and there's more money to be made. That's why there's more spent on it, more press.
Okay.
The one thing that people often miss, and it's really interesting, is the Crown Point Rug Auction. What that is, it's a small town, I would say 200 people. It's on like the second Friday of every month. They hold a rug auction and a arts and crafts show. And you buy the rug right there from the maker. And we went there and we had one of the Navajo tacos, or Indian tacos, which is basically a fry bread with beans and things like that on it. And we just enjoyed the atmosphere, the party, carnival type atmosphere. And I don't think people know about that unless they're into the rugs. You don't have to go there just to buy a rug. I bought a little coyote thing to put on my desk, and my wife bought a brooch. You can go there for other things, but it is really a really nice place to go. Small, not that well known, and I think more people should know about that.
Excellent. Before we get to our typical last three questions, what else should we know before we go to the Navajo Nation?
Time is different. It's very confusing. Arizona does not observe daylight savings time.
No, they have way too much daylight as it is.
The Navajo Nation does. The Hopi Nation does not.
Oh, no.
But some of the activities like Antelope Canyon are close enough to Arizona that they observe Arizona time.
Oh, no.
Yes, and then, of course, Utah, New Mexico, Colorado all observe daylight savings time. You have to ask not only what time is your tour, but what time zone. We got very confused up around Page because of Utah is about 5 miles from Page. Page is in Arizona. It was no daylight savings time. The tribal park, even though it was on the reservation, it's very confusing. So, yeah, that's something you have to be cognizant of, is if you're there during the summertime, or nowadays almost the whole year with daylight savings time.
Excellent. Last three questions. You know what's coming. One thing that made you laugh and say only in the Navajo Nation.
And I guess that was that radio. When I turned on the radio and was scanning for a station and I heard Navajo. That really made me laugh, and I told my wife, you got to listen to this.
Did you pick up any words of Navajo while you were there?
No.
Okay.
None. The name of the tribe, they call themselves the Dene, I believe is the name. And that's about the extent of it.
Okay. Finish this sentence for me. You really know you're in the Navajo Nation when what?
When you can turn around 360 degrees, see for miles and miles, but not see another person or another structure.
And if you had to summarize this area of the world in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
This is the one my wife and I talked about. We both had the first two the same, hot and dry.
Okay.
The third one, empty, I guess is the best. We didn't want to say desolate. That's too much negative connotation. Uninhabited isn't quite right. So we used the word empty. Hot, dry, and empty.
Excellent. Mark, where can people read more about your travels?
I have a blog. It's called markstravels.com. I concentrate mainly in New Mexico and a little bit in Arizona. And I put everything from my trip to the Navajo Nation to my Sunday drive in my Jeep. So there's all kinds of stuff on there.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for coming on The Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love of this area.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for having me.
In news from the community, I occasionally ask for iTunes reviews, so I'd like to thank the couple people who wrote one recently. I got one that said, if you love to travel, love dreaming about travel and learning about travel, then this is the podcast for you. I've discovered so many places in the world that I want to explore, all thanks to this show. Chris, the host, is a delightful interviewer, and I always look forward to some of his classic questions. He asks each of his guests Plus, I do get a kick out of his sense of humor. This podcast is a great resource while planning a trip. I'm so happy that I found the Amateur Traveler podcast. It has truly enriched my life. Thank you, Chris, for all the work you put into each episode. And that was done by Owl Trance, and thanks so much. That's very encouraging. It's always wonderful to hear. That was a 5-star review, and just to keep me humble, the 4-star review, so still not a bad review, that I got from Amalicus was, Chris, your guest Amy was right in her statement of Douglas's loss to Lincoln for the presidency. Your attempt to correct her was condescending. Great show, though. And that was on the South Side Chicago segment. My apologies. I did not mean to be condescending. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, feel free to send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or a 5-star review on iTunes is always helpful, as it does help people discover the show. You can also join the Facebook community, facebook.com/amateurtraveler. Follow me on Twitter @Chris2X, or just leave a comment on this episode to tell us what you think of the Navajo Nation. Remember, if you want to do a day trip to there, next time you're in Phoenix, Flagstaff, or Sedona, check out amateurtraveler.com/tours. And as always, thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more.